Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. Yes, it is me. I just chopped all my hair off. Those of you who are listening through audio only will have to jump on over to YouTube and go ahead and leave a comment to say hi while you're here. Long story short, I damaged my hair pretty badly, and I've spent the past 6 months trying to recover, and I was getting tired of it just feeling like straw, so I decided it was time to just chop it off. Now that we have confirmed my identity, I am indeed Bobby Holmes. Let's get into this week's story. Listener Samantha Crane from Addison, New York, wrote in requesting me to cover the case that just happened 15 miles away from her hometown in Savona, New York. This is the story of 13-year-old murderer Eric Smith. I remember stumbling across this case back when I covered Mary Bell. In my research, I used an article from Among Men titled 5 Chilling Cases of Kids Who Kill. To give a quick overview of the others listed in the article, number 1, Mary Bell, an 11-year-old girl who tortured and killed 2 young boys. You can go back and listen to episode 39 for the full details on her. Number 2, 14-year-old Josh Phillips, who killed 8-year-old Maddie Clifton. He claims he was playing ball with her in his room when he hit her over the head with a baseball bat. Maddie, of course, started to cry, and to avoid getting in trouble, he put his hands around her neck to silence her. He strangled her to death and hid her body in his waterbed. A week later, Josh's mother discovered the body after attempting to fix a leak in his bed. Can you even imagine finding the body of a young girl that your child killed and stowed away like nothing happened? Number 3. 10-year-olds John Venables and Robert Thompson were skipping school and hanging out at the New Strand Shopping Center in Liverpool, England. While paying for her groceries, the mother of 2-year-old James Bulger turned her attention away from him for a split second. John and Robert abducted him. Their initial plan was to take James to a busy highway and push him into oncoming traffic. But they ended up taking him to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, where they lifted James up and literally dropped him on his head. Then they continued to walk around town with a hysterical toddler. They were spotted by 38 different witnesses. A few people approached the boys to figure out what was wrong and try to help. They said that James was their little brother, or that he was lost and they were taking him to the police station. They walked for miles and ended up in the village of Walton. They took James to an old railway station where they beat him to death. They laid his deceased body across the railroad tracks, assuming once he was hit by a train, his death would be ruled an accident. But apparently they know nothing about autopsies or forensics. It was obvious that he was dead prior to being hit by the train. Number 4, 16-year-old Brenda Spencer sat in front of her house and aimed a .22 caliber rifle across the street to an elementary school. She killed 2 people, the school principal and the janitor. 8 kids were injured in the shooting. To explain her actions, she said, quote, "I don't like Mondays. This livens up the day," unquote. That is one serious case of the Mondays. It terrifies me to think that these kids are capable of these brutal crimes. There are really no excuses for this type of behavior. But in the preteen years, a child's brain is remodeling. Essentially, use it or lose it, making room in the brain for new development. It starts in the back of the brain and moves forward. The last part of the brain to fully develop is the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making, controlling impulses, and the ability to plan ahead and understand consequences to actions. It seems like these kids are missing their prefrontal cortex altogether. I keep thinking of the water boy. There's something wrong with his medulla oblongata. The 5th and final child killer on the list is Eric Smith. Let's find out what triggered him to commit murder. Eric was born January 22nd, 1980. His mother, Tammy, has epilepsy, and the medications she was taking during her pregnancy with Eric is known to cause birth defects. Physically, Eric's ears were set very low on his head and folded over at the top. This trait, along with the fact that he had bright red hair, freckles, and super thick glasses, made him a target for bullies at school. When Eric was just a toddler, he would bang his head off the floor in frustration. He struggled with his speech and threw constant tantrums. Now, I remember my son banging his head off of things when he was that age. I was concerned and brought it up to the pediatrician. He said that it's common for kids to do this before they learn to speak. They have trouble expressing themselves without words and become frustrated. He said they rarely do it hard enough to actually hurt themselves. So I'm not sure how out of the ordinary that part is if he was having trouble with his speech. His developmental delays held him back 2 grade levels in school. When he did begin to speak, he would often drool. I'm sure that was added ammo for the bullies. There are a few other interesting facts about Eric that came up in my research that are worth mentioning. One is that he became physically attracted to girls at age 4. It's a strange documented fact, particularly because it would have to be from Eric's recollection. Is that normal? I can't imagine that it's abnormal. I remember having a boyfriend in daycare, but when they say physically attracted, do they mean in a sexual manner? It's one thing for him to have a crush, but I don't think 4-year-olds know or understand sex without someone teaching them. Which brings me to my next fact. Young Eric smoked cigarettes, termed a heavy smoker by age 9. It doesn't sound like he had the best role models. In interviews, Eric said he didn't have the greatest home life, but I wasn't able to find any details on exactly what he experienced. I do know his biological father took off and he was adopted and raised by his stepfather, Ted. Ted was interviewed following the murder and said that one day Eric approached him, shaking with anger. He said he wanted to hurt someone. Ted, not understanding how serious he was, told him that when he feels that way, he hits a punching bag. Instead, Eric went outside and punched a tree over and over. He came back inside with swollen, bloody knuckles. Eric was a loner. He didn't have any friends at school or in his neighborhood. He tended to hang out alone in his room and read books. Sounds harmless, right? His favorite authors were Stephen King and Christopher Pike. We are all familiar with Stephen King. He is known for his terrifying horror novels. Eric was pretty young to be enjoying Stephen King. I can't say too much on that subject because I watched it as a kid and it definitely traumatized me. Christopher Pike similarly wrote horror and science fiction, but it was geared more towards young adults. Nothing wrong with a kid enjoying reading if it's age appropriate. In a previous episode, I talked about the McDonald triad, 3 traits that most sexual predators and people who commit murder tend to have in common: bedwetting, arson, and cruelty to animals. Eric Smith checked off all 3. As a preteen, he was diagnosed with depression and intermittent explosive disorder. Essentially, he would go from 0 to 100 without any apparent reason. Totally unwarranted outbursts. August 2nd, 1993. A 4-year-old boy named Derrick Robie was walking over half a mile to a park where he participated in summer camp. I know times were different, but that distance seems a bit far to allow a 4-year-old to walk alone. My son is 5.5, and I barely let him pass the driveway. Another source said it was only a block that he had to walk, which may not be a big deal if you watched him from the driveway and had him turn and wave to you once he made it. Yeah, I'm a helicopter mom. Derrick's mother, Doreen, walked to the park to pick him up. To her horror, she found out that Derrick never made it to camp. Eric went to the very same summer camp. That morning, he was misbehaving and was asked to leave. Eric left for home on his bike when he spotted young Derrick walking alone. He was so angry that he was asked to leave camp, and the years of being bullied at school had pushed him to his breaking point. He decided to take out his anger on an innocent 4-year-old boy. Eric approached Derrick and persuaded him to go into the woods. It seems like Eric at least knew of Derrick prior to this, probably just from living in the same neighborhood. Derrick put his trust in the older boy and followed him. When he got Derrick alone, he wrapped his hands around his neck and began strangling him. He then laid him on the ground and dropped 2 large rocks on his head. The injuries to his skull were fatal. It wasn't enough to just take his life. This kid continued to torture Derrick post-mortem. Eric opened his lunchbox. He squished a banana. Sounds silly to note, but it does come back around. Then he grabbed his Kool-Aid and poured it into the open wounds on his head. Eric sodomized Derrick's body with a tree branch. In episode 6 of Killer Stories, I covered the case of 14-year-old murderer Philip Chisholm. He followed his teacher Colleen Ritzer into the bathroom at school, where he strangled and raped her. He placed her body into a garbage can and rolled it out to the woods, where he continued to torture her. Like Eric, he also used a tree branch to defile her. Philip at 14 looks like he's 20. Eric at 13 looks like he's 10. It just seems so much more shocking. This little redhead, who appears to be a normal, innocent child, is in fact a monster. After realizing Derrick was missing, police started searching for him. Within 4 hours, they found his body in the woods. His death was a mystery. They actually spoke with Eric a few times during the investigation. He was calm and even described as upbeat. He was fine up until they asked him when was the last time he saw Derrick. He became very angry and shook his fist, shouting, "You think I killed him, don't you?" They decided to take a break and allow Eric to calm down. His dad brought him a glass of red Kool-Aid. Eric took one look at it and threw it across the room. Investigators later realized that his strong reaction to the Kool-Aid was because of what he did at the crime scene with Derrick's Kool-Aid. The next day, he rode his bike to the park and pointed out the area where he claimed to have last seen Derrick to the police. Eric didn't have any friends, but he was really close with his grandparents. His grandfather, Red Wilson, said they never in a million years thought he was responsible for the murder, but they could tell he was hiding something. Eric also spent a lot of time at the house of his neighbors, John and Marlene Heskell. In the days following the murder, Marlene said that Eric asked a lot of questions that raised suspicion. He asked her what would happen if it was a kid that did it, and what does DNA testing show? Marlene was chatting with one of her friends who shared her theory that it was a kid who doesn't like bananas. Why would an adult go out of their way to make a mess and squish the banana? Marlene thought back to Eric's questions and decided to go buy ice cream and bananas. She offered to make banana splits for everyone. Eric asked for just ice cream and toppings because he didn't like bananas. 7 days after the murder, Tammy knew that Eric was holding back information. She begged him to tell her what he knew. But I don't think she was prepared for what he had to say. Eric confessed to killing Derrick. Tammy was completely shocked. She knew something wasn't right, but her son, a murderer? The media had a field day with this case due to the young ages of both the victim and the perpetrator. It really was, and still is, unbelievable. August 16th, 1994, Eric Smith was convicted of second-degree murder. He received the maximum sentencing for juveniles in the state of New York, a minimum of 9 years to life. He started his sentence in a juvenile detention center. Then he moved up to a prison for young adults, and in 2001, he was transferred to the Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York. Over the years, Eric has done interviews where he expressed his deep regret for his crimes and tried to give an explanation as to why he did it. He was bullied by not just other kids at school, but also by his father and sister. Like the bullies, Eric picked a victim who was smaller and weaker than he was. He said it was the only way to make the pain go away. Quote, "Instead of me being hurt, I was hurting someone else. I know my actions have caused a terrible loss in the Robie family, and for that, I am truly sorry. I've tried to think as much as possible about what Derrick will never experience. His 16th birthday, Christmas, anytime, owning his own house, graduating, going to college, getting married, his first child. If I could go back in time, I would switch places with Derrick and endure all the pain I've caused him. If it meant that he would go on living, I'd switch places. But I can't." Unquote. Since his imprisonment, Eric has been up for parole over 10 times. Each time, it was denied. It's been 27 years since his conviction. Every 2 years, Eric's case gets reviewed. Each time, the Robie family presents pictures and home videos of Derrick to a jury and beg them to keep Eric behind bars, which is where he remains today. I honestly don't know how I feel about this case. He was so young when it happened. Perhaps there was something wrong with his medulla oblongata, prefrontal cortex. Maybe he is truly reformed. On the other hand, what if he's not? What if he's released and commits another violent act? The Robies have worked hard to keep the memory of Derrick alive. One thing he loved was playing t-ball. In fact, he was buried in his baseball uniform. A memorial ball field was built in the spot where he lost his life. I really want to know your opinions. Do you think 27 years is long enough? Or does Eric Smith deserve life in prison for the crime he committed when he was 13? Follow me on social media so we can chat about the case. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at Killer Stories PC. I just wanted to throw a little shout out to my friend Lorraine from Once Upon a Nightmare podcast. I recently recorded with her and Stuart Blues from British Murders. We discussed the movie 1408. It will air this upcoming Tuesday if you want to check it out. My family is taking a much-needed weekend getaway, and I plan to do nothing but relax by the pool. So, having said that, there will not be an episode next week. But I will be back August 18th with a brand new killer story. In the meantime, you could go ahead and check out that 1408 episode on Once Upon a Nightmare, or another podcast I've been binging lately is Dark History with my girl Bailey Sarian. I have been obsessed with her Murder, Mystery, and Makeup Mondays on YouTube. Well, now she has a podcast. She talks about the dark side of American history that they don't teach you in school. There, you have plenty of material to keep you occupied in my absence. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this has been a killer story.